Welcome to the deep dive, where we take the material you're exploring and really dig into what matters.
Hmm.
Today, we're focusing on a pretty key section from Sid Tak Che.8.pdf. It's the chapter called By the River, and also the ideas of interest and topics worth investigating that go with it.
Yeah, this is a big one. What's unfolding here, for you, the listener, is a truly significant moment in our character Siddhartha's journey.
Right.
We'll be tracing his path from, well, the absolute depths of despair right through to a crucial turning point. We're looking at how he sheds an old way of being and embraces transformation.
And it's more than just a plot point, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. This
Yeah.
isn't just a story. It's really a chance for us to consider the nature of profound personal change. What does it really take?
Okay, so let's dive right in. At the start of this section, Siddhartha is in a really, really dark place.
Hmm.
The text says he passionately wished to know nothing about himself anymore, to have rest, to be dead. I mean, that's about as bleak as it gets, wouldn't you say?
It really is.
Yeah.
For you listening, this immediately signals the sheer intensity of his crisis. It's rock bottom.
Yeah.
It is. He's reached a point where he feels utterly overwhelmed by, well, all the negativity he sees in life. He uses this really striking image.
The sponge.
Yes, the sponge image, saying he had sucked up disgust and death from all sides into his body, like a sponge sucks up water until it is full.
Oh, wow.
It just perfectly conveys that sense of complete saturation, complete depletion. For you, this really highlights how, clinging to negativity can eventually just lead to a complete rejection of your current state.
Which might be necessary sometimes.
Often, yeah. Often a necessary precursor for radical change.
Yeah.
You have to hit that wall.
And it's not just this vague existential dread. He's also completely fed up with just the basics of existence, the
Right.
routine, eating, sleeping, even the sensual pleasures he chased before they've become unbearable. Exhausted is the word the text uses.
Exactly.
It really makes you wonder about those times when even the things we usually enjoy just lose their appeal entirely.
Precisely. The fundamental rhythms of life, they just don't work for him anymore. They've lost all meaning. So he arrives at the riverbank with just one overwhelming desire
To end it.
to end his life. Yeah.
Yeah.
He sees his existence up to this point as a complete failure, something that needs to be annihilated.
There's that incredibly powerful line where it says, "The frightening emptiness was reflected back at him by the water, answering to the terrible emptiness in his soul."
Hmm.
It's like his inner state is literally mirrored in the world around him. Have you ever felt that kind of mirroring, where your mood seems to change how you see everything?
Oh, absolutely. And that mirroring is a key insight here for you, the listener. The external landscape often does become a manifestation of our inner state, our inner turmoil.
So the river isn't just water.
No. The water, which is usually, a symbol of life and flow, here it reflects stagnation in the void. It just underscores the deep connection between our internal and external realities, especially in times of crisis.
But then, right at this moment of absolute despair, something completely unexpected happens.
Yeah. Just as he's about to give in, about to fall into the river, this sound,
Yeah.
it just arises from within him, from his soul. What's so significant about it coming from inside?
Well, what's fascinating here is precisely that internal source. It doesn't come from, someone shouting or some external event. It emerges from remote areas of his soul.
Wow.
It's described as this primal sound, the beginning and end of all words, the sound of perfection. For you, this might suggest that sometimes the biggest shifts, the most profound changes, come from these unexpected, deep internal sources, not from external logic or someone telling you what to do.
And the impact is instant, isn't it? It's
Yep.
transformative. The text says his dormant spirit suddenly woke up and realized the foolishness of his actions, like
Yeah.
a switch flipping.
Exactly. It's like an internal alarm goes off. This single sound acts as a catalyst for this profound shift in his consciousness. He suddenly reconnects with these fundamental truths he had seemingly lost.
Like Brahman. Yes. Brahman, the indestructibility of life, all that is divine. And Brahman, in this context, you can understand it as the ultimate reality, the sort of underlying unity of everything.
And it's so important to know how this happens for you, the listener. It's not through some agonizing intellectual process or him arguing himself out of it.
No.
It's this almost mystical experience triggered by this ancient sound. It makes you think about the power of non-rational experiences in our own lives, doesn't it?
That's absolutely right. It completely bypasses the rational mind, the thinking mind, and hits directly at a deeper level of his being. It's a rediscovery of something fundamental that he, intellectually knew before, but he'd lost that visceral connection to it.
Yeah.
It really highlights the limitations of just intellect alone in achieving, true understanding or transformation.
So what happens right after this? He's had this huge moment.
Well, he collapses by a coconut tree, the text says. And he falls into this incredibly deep, dreamless sleep.
Like a system reset.
Exactly.
Right.
And when he wakes up, he feels like he's been reborn. That sense of starting completely fresh must have been incredibly powerful.
The imagery of rebirth is definitely significant for your understanding here. That long, dreamless sleep signifies a complete break, a severing from his immediate past self. He awakens feeling refreshed, renewed, thus rejuvenated, almost as if a previous version of himself, the desperate one, has actually died.
Yeah, it emphasizes just how radical that internal shift was.
And almost immediately after waking up, he runs into his old friend Govinda.
Right.
And incredibly, Govinda doesn't even recognize him at first. What does that lack of recognition tell us about how much Siddhartha has changed for you?
Well, that lack of recognition really underscores the depth of the transformation, doesn't it? The external signs, the things Govinda once knew him by, they're just not enough anymore.
He looks different, or just feels different.
Probably both.
Yeah.
But it strongly suggests the change wasn't superficial. It went right to the core of his being. He's fundamentally altered.
So when Govinda finally asks who he is, Siddhartha says he is on a pilgrimage. But Govinda's understandably a bit skeptical, right? He points out Siddhartha's rich clothes, which don't exactly scream pilgrim. Why do you think Siddhartha uses this explanation? Why not try to explain the crazy thing that just happened?
Well, there could be several reasons for you to consider. Perhaps he's still processing it himself, this profound, kind of inexplicable interchange. He might not have the words yet to really articulate it properly.
Makes sense.
And the idea of a pilgrimage, well, that offers the familiar framework that Govinda, as a fellow spiritual seeker, would understand, even if it doesn't capture the whole
It's
picture.
like a shorthand.
Exactly. It might also be a way for Siddhartha to gently put some distance between himself and his past identity, without having a long, potentially difficult conversation. He's signaling, I'm not the Siddhartha you once knew.
And then Siddhartha has this line, the wheel of physical manifestations is turning quickly, Govinda. It suggests he's recognizing how fleeting material existence is and the roles we play. This sounds a lot like the Buddhist idea of samsara, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. The wheel of physical manifestation strongly echoes that concept of samsara, which, for you listening, represents the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, all driven by karma and our attachments.
Like being stuck on a loop.
Pretty much, yeah. Think of it as a continuous loop of worldly experiences. The text we have mentions the wheel of existence and describes 10 fetters that bind beings to this cycle. Things like self-illusion, that false sense of a permanent self, attachment to rituals just for their own sake, sensual lust, ignorance. Siddhartha becoming aware of this turning wheel signifies a big step towards understanding this whole cyclical nature of existence.
It's interesting, though, that despite this massive inner shift, Siddhartha realizes he's actually lost some of the abilities he once really valued, like fasting, waiting, thinking in that really rigorous way he used to.
Right.
You'd almost think those spiritual skills would stick around or even get stronger.
But this loss of former abilities is absolutely key to understanding his transformation for you. It signifies the shedding of that old self, the self that relied on those disciplines as a means to an end.
Ah, okay.
He's no longer the ascetic trying to force enlightenment or the intellectual trying to think his way there. He's moving towards a different kind of understanding altogether.
And instead of being upset about losing these things he was proud of, he actually feels joy. He laughs, the text says, at being void and naked and stupid, like a child starting over.
Yeah.
That's a pretty radical shift in perspective, isn't it?
It's incredibly significant for you. This embrace of a childlike state suggests a real letting go of ego, letting go of the burdens of past knowledge, past achievements. He's finding freedom in this apparent lack.
Liberation.
Yes, a sense of liberation from the expectations and limitations he used to put on himself.
He even draws a parallel with the river itself, accepting its continuous downward flow. It's like he's finally aligning himself with the natural movement of life instead of fighting it. What does the river really symbolize for Siddhartha now, do you think?
The river becomes this incredibly powerful, enduring metaphor for his own journey, and crucially, for the acceptance of change for you. It flows without resistance, constantly moving, constantly changing, mirroring his newfound acceptance of his own path with all its twists and unexpected turns. It's a symbol of the continuous, ever-changing nature of life itself. He's learning from the river.
So he's reflecting on his whole life's journey, Brahmin, ascetic, rich man, and he comes to this really startling conclusion: I had to sin to be able to live again.
Yeah.
That's pretty provocative.
It is. It's a pivotal realization for your understanding.
Mm.
He sees that his detours, his experiences in the world of sensation, of material things, they weren't mistakes. They were necessary steps. Necessary. He had to experience the full spectrum of life, even the parts he now looks back on as sinful or foolish, to actually arrive at his current state of understanding.
He even says he had to spend many years losing my spirit, to unlearn thinking again, to forget the oneness. It's almost like he had to get completely lost to truly find his way back. Have you ever felt that? Like needing to dismantle old beliefs to move forward?
Exactly. His intellectual grasp of oneness, it wasn't enough. It was just an idea. He needed to actually lose himself in the world to experience separation, suffering, desire, all of it.
Messy stuff.
The messy stuff, yeah. In order to truly rediscover Atman, which here means the individual soul or true self within himself, it's about shifting from just knowing something in your head to deeply experientially understanding it in your bones.
This helps him understand why his earlier attempts to kill off his self through knowledge and harsh practices, why they failed. He realizes his ego just sort of shapeshifted, right? It retreated into new roles with the wise man, the pious priest. It's like the ego is always finding a new costume.
Precisely. His ego was like a chameleon, constantly finding new forms to inhabit, even when he was trying his hardest to transcend the self through spiritual practices. The ego subtly snuck back in, disguised as piety or wisdom.
Sneaky.
Very sneaky. It highlights just how persistent the ego is.
So, for you listening, he had to go through all those worldly experiences, the highs and lows, to let that old, entrenched self finally actually die.
Yeah.
And in its place, he feels like a child again, full of trust, without fear, joyful. This sounds like a profound liberation.
The death of the old self is absolutely the prerequisite for this rebirth. By experiencing the extremes of worldly life, he effectively dismantled the structures of his former ego. He broke it down.
Creating space.
Exactly, creating space for a new, more authentic self to emerge.
Yeah.
And that childlike state signifies a return to a more fundamental, trusting, open way of being.
And all of this intense transformation happens by the river.
Yep.
So it's no wonder he feels this deep connection to it. He sees it as the place where the old, desperate Siddhartha drowned. Literally, almost, and the new one was born. And he makes the decision to stay there. What does staying by the river signify for his future, do you think?
Well, the river, for you, becomes this potent symbol of transformation and renewal in his life. It's the literal and metaphorical site of his death and resurrection. So it's a place of immense personal significance.
A sacred space for him.
Definitely. And his decision to stay suggests a commitment to this ongoing process of change, a willingness to keep learning from the constant flow of life symbolized by the river itself.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly and look at some of the ideas of interest raised alongside the text. The first one asks why Siddhartha falls deeper into despair after leaving the life of sensation. It seems a bit backward at first glance. What's your take on this for us?
Well, what's fascinating here for you is that simply abandoning an old way of life, just walking away, isn't automatically a path to happiness or enlightenment. If that abandonment isn't accompanied by some kind of new understanding or a genuine acceptance of oneself and where you are, it can easily just lead to a void, a sense of meaninglessness.
So he just traded one kind of emptiness for another?
In a way, yes. Siddhartha hadn't yet found that inner peace. He had just rejected his previous existence. It really emphasizes the importance of what we move towards, not just what we run away from. You need a positive vision, not just a rejection.
The second point asks about Siddhartha's pretense of a pilgrimage when he meets Govinda. We touched on this, but are there any other, maybe subtler reasons for you and why he might have chosen that specific explanation?
Well, consider this. Perhaps he's also sort of testing the waters with Govinda gently. He wants to see if their old connection, their friendship, still holds despite his obvious outward changes, without immediately launching into this incredibly complex explanation of his inner turmoil and near-death experience. The pilgrimage offers a safe, somewhat vague explanation. It allows them to reconnect without Siddhartha having to reveal his raw, vulnerable state right away.
Like a little buffer.
Exactly. It's a way of gauging Govinda's reaction to the changed external Siddhartha first.
Okay, the third idea, wonders what Siddhartha might have learned from Govinda in this meeting, even though Govinda doesn't really say anything profound. What could the takeaway be from that aspect of the encounter for you?
Sometimes the most significant lessons aren't explicitly taught. They're learned through simple observation, through contrast. Govinda embodies this life of unwavering devotion to a specific path, a specific teacher,
Steady.
very steady. And even though Siddhartha ultimately chose a different, more turbulent route, just observing Govinda's simple faith and commitment that might have offered a subtle but important lesson in the value of conviction, something Siddhartha himself was really grappling with.
Hmm.
It highlights for you that there isn't just one right way. There are many valid approaches to seeking meaning. Govinda's way works for Govinda.
Finally, the text asks how the Buddha's warning about too much knowledge foreshadowed Siddhartha's crisis. And it really does seem like his intense intellectual searching was part of what led him to that pit of despair.
Exactly. Siddhartha's initial spiritual journey was so heavily focused on intellectual understanding, on rigorous mental discipline. Buddha's warning hints that intellect alone can actually be a barrier, a hindrance to true awakening.
Thinking too much gets in the way.
It can. Siddhartha's crisis arose, at least in part, from his relentless attempts to control and understand his self through knowledge, through thinking. This prevented him from experiencing a more intuitive, embodied understanding of life. He had to move beyond just intellectual comprehension to a deeper, more experiential wisdom for his real transformation to happen.
Got it. Now let's turn to the topics worth investigating. The first one is intriguing. Could Siddhartha's despair be seen as a kind of midlife crisis from a modern psychological viewpoint? Gail Sheehy's quote about letting go and casting off old selves for growth is mentioned. What connections can we draw for you here?
Well, it's certainly tempting to draw parallels for you, isn't it? While obviously midlife crisis is a modern psychological term.
Right, they didn't have that label then.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But the core themes, questioning your life path, feeling disillusioned with past achievements, this deep desire for fundamental change, they resonate very strongly with Siddhartha's experience.
Yeah, they really do.
And Sheehy's idea about needing to relinquish old ways, old identities to allow for further development, that aligns perfectly with Siddhartha shedding his former roles, his abilities, everything. The intense despair could absolutely be seen as the catalyst for this necessary casting off of an old self to make way for a new one. It fits that pattern.
The second topic revisits the wheel of physical manifestation, and it's linked to samsara, which we touched on. Can we elaborate on that connection for you, maybe by looking at a few more of those fetters that bind us to the wheel?
Absolutely. As we discussed, the wheel of physical manifestation is a clear parallel to samsara. Looking at some more of those 10 fetters can give you further insight. For instance, we mentioned self-illusion, that mistaken belief in a permanent, separate self, which Siddhartha wrestled with constantly in his early pursuits.
Right.
Then there's attachment to mere rule and ritual. This describes the danger of getting fixated on practices, on the outward forms, without understanding their true inner purpose. Something Siddhartha definitely did in his ascetic phase, pushing himself to extremes.
Going through the motions.
Exactly. Understanding these fetters helps clarify what keeps people, in this view, bound to the cycle of dissatisfaction, the cycle that Siddhartha was so desperately trying to escape.
Okay, and the final topic explores how exactly Siddhartha's psychological and philosophical transformation occurred. It wasn't just one lightning bolt moment, was it? What would you highlight as the key elements for someone looking at their own journey of change?
Not at all. It was really a confluence of factors, a process that led to Siddhartha's transformation. And it offers valuable lessons for you, the listener. First, that rock bottom of despair was crucial.
Hitting the wall.
He had to reach his absolute limit to be truly open to radical change. Then you have the unexpected emergence of the Om that acted as the catalyst, the spark. A moment of profound reconnection with something deeper within himself.
At a turning point.
Definitely. Then, the symbolic death of his old self in the river and his subsequent feeling of rebirth are absolutely central to this process. And finally, his reflections after waking up, his acceptance of his life's journey, his past foolishness, his newfound understanding of the limits of intellect, all of these contributed to this deep, multifaceted change.
So it's a journey.
It's a journey through darkness to light, requiring both a breaking down of the old and a conscious rebuilding, or perhaps allowing, of the new.
So, to try and summarize our deep dive for you today, We've traced Siddhartha's path from this overwhelming desire for oblivion right through the profound awakening triggered by the sound of Om to a kind of rebirth by the river.
Hmm.
He sheds his old identities, his old abilities, embraces this almost childlike state of being, and ultimately comes to understand the necessity of his life's detours and the death of his former self. And the river really stands out as this powerful symbol of both death and renewal.
Exactly. And when we consider the ideas of interest, we've explored how his deeper despair after leaving the life of sensation likely stemmed from a lack of inner peace, not just external circumstances.
Right.
His pilgrimage excuse to Govinda was perhaps a way to navigate a complex explanation, a sort of gentle buffer. He may have learned the value of simple conviction just by observing his friend. And his crisis was indeed foreshadowed by the limitations of relying solely on intellect, as Buddha warned.
And finally, looking at the topics worth investigating, we've drawn those interesting parallels between Siddhartha's experience and the modern psychological concept of a midlife crisis.
Yeah.
His wheel of physical manifestation clearly aligns with the Buddhist concept of samsara and its binding fetters. And we recognize that his transformation wasn't a single event, but a complex process involving despair, a spiritual catalyst, symbolic death and rebirth, and importantly, profound reflection afterwards.
Well put. This deep dive into Siddhartha's transformative experience really leaves us with a powerful question for you to consider. Can true transformation, the really deep kind, only occur after we've experienced the lowest of lows, after we're truly willing to let go of who we think we are?
Hmm.
Is there a metaphorical river in each of our lives, a point of significant change, maybe crisis, where an old self can dissolve, allowing something new to emerge? It's definitely worth reflecting on your own moments of significant change and the often unexpected forces, internal or external, that drove them.